I'm so excited to answer your questions about music, but wanted to address something that I noticed was a trend in many of the questions. So music, like food, like language, is an aspect of culture. It's a reflection of a culture and the time period. So it's impossible to elevate one above the other. If I were to answer or to attempt to answer a question about the best music or the best instrument, it would be impossible for me to do that without revealing my own personal bias and without being extremely ethnocentric, and I want to avoid that. So I'll do my best to give you as much information about each topic, each question that was asked, without doing that, and hopefully it'll help you make some informed decisions for your kids. How do I teach my baby about music? I can make so many comparisons between music development and language development, or any other topic really, but for a child to really start to develop music skills, it shouldn't be taught in isolation. They have to be immersed in it. It has to be practical experiences with it. And it's your job to guide them to start to notice things about music or to guide them to develop a particular skill, but it really has to be in the context of a musical experience. So here are a few things that you can focus on when you're having your natural music experiences, no matter what genre of music you're listening to. So the ability to maintain a steady beat or the pulse of the music is important for musicianship, no matter what kind of music you're playing. So when you're listening to music with your child, rocking them to the pulse of the music, patting the pulse of the music to them is something that you can do from infancy. And it is something that'll help them start to internalize the pulse of music, which is an important music skill, an important lifelong music skill. Another thing that you can start to notice with your child is the tempo of music, for them to distinguish between fast and slow, and to really bring awareness to the kinesthetic movement that goes along with that. When you hear fast music, associating that with running or associating that with a fast animal, making associations between the tempo of the music and things that they're seeing in the world. So you hear slow music and you might start to talk like a snail or move like a slippery snake or crawl like a turtle, to bring awareness to that slow tempo and how it relates in the practical. Pitch is something else that you can start to bring awareness to when you're talking about things that are going up high, moving your voice up high, and things that are down low, your voice can go low. When you're reading a book that has characters moving up and down, your voice can also do that. When you are also referring to small things, we kind of do this naturally. We talk about the little tiny baby with the little tiny mouse. And when we talk about big things, we tend to focus, we tend to make the pitch of our voice go lower. But these are all concrete music skills. Small instruments make high sounds and big instruments make low sounds. Little people make small sounds and taller adults make deeper sounds with our voices. And it's because there is a science behind that that has to do with how quickly something vibrates based on its size. But also making the association between a pitch going high and a pitch going low, or person going high, and that vertical association with pitch is also a pre-music reading skill. On a music staff, notes that are going higher go up the music staff, and notes that are going lower or that are low are lower on the music staff. And so starting to make those connections at a very young age is pre-music literacy, and you can start that from as early as you decide to read your infant's books. You can already start to make those pitch associations. Dynamics, how loud or quiet something is another thing that you can start to bring your children's awareness to. Listening to loud music and you want to stomp around a room or do big kinesthetic movements to associate your movement with the volume of the music or the dynamics, as well as how you would move to quiet music, how you would tiptoe, or what kind of thing, how would you kinesthetically move to quiet music. Just bringing that awareness, or even if you have an infant, to the way you move when you're holding them is a great way to start to bring their awareness to dynamics. Tone color or timbre, which is kind of the quality of sound, meaning a voice, how a voice sounds or how an instrument sounds, is something that you also want to bring their attention to. Start to label the instruments that you hear. If you actually have small versions of them or have books of those things, listen to the instruments when you hear them so that they start to make an association between the instruments they see and the things that they hear and the instruments that they hear, or the quality of voice, identifying a male voice from a female voice or high voice from a low voice. All of those things are just bringing their attention to what it is that they're listening to. So tone color is another great place to start. Duration of sound is something that's great to bring your children's attention to when they're listening to music, but particularly when they're playing instruments. When you hit that wooden instrument like a wood block or perhaps a small drum, usually has a pretty short sound. But if you strike a triangle or have finger cymbals or any other metal instrument, they usually ring for a much longer time. Start to bring awareness to what are things made out of that ring for a long time or vibrate for a long time? What are those things made of that have a very short sound? And it's just another awareness for them to start listening with a focus as they listen to music and as they play music. So I want to talk about the origins of this idea that classical music can lead to heightened intelligence or language development. This came from a study that took place in the 90s called the Mozart Effect. And the study was conducted on college students, and they were taking IQ tests while listening to a Mozart sonata. The results were that there was a temporary increase in their IQ as they listened to this Mozart sonata. It was temporary, and years later, the test was attempted to be replicated over a dozen times, and those results never panned out the same exact way. Now, from this isolated skill set that was tested during the Mozart Effect study, there was an explosion of information that went out that trickled all the way down to infancy and toddlers, and even to babies in utero. That if you listen to classical music, it got spread beyond the Mozart sonata now to classical music as a whole. It got taken from isolated skill on with students of college age to now this is something beneficial to babies. This happens because as parents of young children, we are a huge market that is willing to spend money on things. And particularly if people tell us that something is going to give our children an edge, then we are willing to hear it. One of the things, let me just end that with saying that the Mozart Effect has been largely debunked. All of the things that trickled down to infancy and toddlerhood and babies in utero all stemmed from that study, and none of it was honest because this has never been actually studied on infants, on toddlers, on children in general. The test was only conducted with college students. One of the issues that I want to raise with this is something that I started off saying is about the ethnocentrism of this concept. To imagine that the classical music of the elite in Europe is associated with higher intelligence shows an extreme bias and something that I think is kind of fused in the psychology of our country and probably worldwide, that things that derive from Europe in so many ways are better and are elevated or more refined, and in fact can even make you smarter. And I do take issue with that ideology, and I want to say this as a European classically trained clarinetist. I love classical music, but really had to think hard about this concept that I thought was true at some point because I had heard about it, and had to think about if I had heard a study that West African drumming led to higher intelligence, or if the country had heard that, how many of us would believe that immediately? If we had heard that Indian tabla music was associated with higher intelligence, would we believe that? If we heard that taiko drumming would be, if we listened to that, would lead to higher intelligence, I don't think that it would have been as broadly accepted and such a huge moneymaker in our society. People still believe this. And so anytime you hear a particular genre or time period being elevated, you have to know that there is something awry. There is something that you should be questioning about the ethnocentrism that statements like that are coming from. And to just buyer beware. If anything, I started this saying that music is a reflection of culture and time period. And if someone says that one of those things is better, it's the same as saying that one language is better than another, that one type of cuisine is better than another, that one year is better than another, measured by what? So no, it is not more important that your child listens to classical music. If you love classical music and want to expose your child to that genre, by all means do. And again, you can bring out those same music skills that I mentioned in previous questions. But you can do that through any genre of music, and different genres of music are just opening different pathways in your child's brain the same way that learning different languages does. All genres are important, and it just has to do with your own personal preference and what you decide to elevate in your own home, or what you have a personal preference for. I listen to a wide variety of music with my daughter, but there are some genres that don't tickle my fancy, so they're not heard in our home, because my focus really is the music skills that I can pull out of each genre, and as many genres as I can handle in my home are the ones that I'm going to expose my child to. So just like with language development, it just gives a different experience. Of course, there's a very rich experience where you can add a personal connection to singing a song to your child. And I want to just add, do not worry about your voice if you feel like you can't sing. Your child will love your voice. Don't worry about what other people think about your voice. I think it's important to sing to your child because it's building connection. It's not just about the music skills. It's about the connection built through the music experience. But that is a different experience from playing recorded music. I would absolutely say not replace recorded music with creating that connection through making music together or singing to your child. Don't replace it, but it can be an addition because of the fact that there are things that your voice can't do on its own. You will hear a wide variety of instruments. You can hear accompaniments. You can hear an orchestra or a band or drumming. All of those things, if you can't do that live yourself, recordings of those things are really important to get a wide variety of music experiences. And referring back to the skills that I told you that you can work on, a lot of that would be difficult for you to describe music and talk about what you're hearing if you're also singing at the same time. So there's benefit to both, but I certainly would not say to replace one with the other. You should probably provide them with both experiences. So I would say if you're making music a task, then it's likely not going to be so enjoyable. I would say, again, I'm making this comparison to language. If music is just in the background or the soundtrack of your life, it's hard to necessarily dislike it. It's just part of your day. Music is just being played as you're doing things. And then you can start to try to point out aspects of the music that you notice. Your child may not burst out with pure joy or laughter or want to dance or move, but in the same way that you might have a child that is delayed in their speech, or not say delayed, but is that decides to speak at a later date than what you had hoped. The idea is you don't just stop talking to them, right? You keep talking. They continue to be immersed in that language, and at some point, voila, they just start talking to you and say things that you never imagined that they were hearing or understanding or had the ability to say. So in that same way with music, keep playing it around them. Keep exposing them to it. Keep pointing out things that are noticeable. If you're holding them, keep rocking them to the music. Don't stop. It is a language, and if they're immersed in it, there will be some joy or some learning that comes from it at some point if you continue to have it be a part of your daily life. What toys should I have in my house for music development? I wouldn't call them toys. I would refer to them as instruments. I think that it's great to have a wide variety of instruments in your home from a very young age. In terms of their coordination is pretty much how you decide. So the initial thing would be a variety of shakers. There are shakers of all types. And because this movement kind of happens spontaneously during infancy, it's great for your child to be able to start to make that connection between their motion and that sound being activated. Next thing you can move to is a drum that can sit on the floor, like a floor tom. And then they have to have the coordination to try to reach and hit that drum repeatedly. Around 6 months or older is when you'll start to see them have that ability when they're able to sit up on their own, or at the point that they're able to sit up on their own. That's a great skill to start to develop. And then you can move on to instruments that require striking, because they need even more fine motor skills and coordination to be able to do that. So things like wood blocks or tambourine or hand drum, claves, guiros. Those are all instruments that take a little bit more coordination, and that's really what you focus on. It's not that one is better than the other. You're just giving children the opportunity to explore instruments at their own developmental level. I personally really like the Suzuki method for a number of reasons, but there are a number of factors to consider. One, if you enroll your child in a serious Suzuki program, it is a big commitment of time. But why I think that's important is because in a fully developed Suzuki program, the parents are asked to take lessons along with the child and to be one step ahead of the child so that you can support them in their learning as they learn that instrument. That's not asked of parents in many other programs, but like language, I think they're thinking about the fact that you can't really immerse yourself into a skill if you're not having that skill reinforced at home. So with the parent learning the instrument alongside the child, it ensures that the parent can guide the child as they struggle with anything pertaining to that instrument. And if without that support in other programs, the child is isolated to just getting the expert knowledge or just having the guidance on that instrument when they're going to their lesson. So the pace of learning or the ability to ask questions is limited to the music expert that they're dealing with. And that just means that the development might be a little bit slower and doesn't allow for the immersion into the music experience as it does with Suzuki. Another thing that I am a big fan of with Suzuki is the fact that the teachers have to be certified. And there are a lot of amazing musicians out there. Being an amazing musician does not necessarily translate to being an amazing teacher. So what's great about the Suzuki method is that you get certified and you have to learn the appropriate child development with the age that you are teaching. And understanding child development, as far as I'm concerned, is more important than knowing any particular topic. You have to understand how to make a complex concept appropriate for the age of the child that you're working with. And that goes for any subject. So what's great about Suzuki is that you're guaranteed, if it's an official Suzuki program, you're guaranteed to have a teacher who understands the developmental level of your child and has been trained to teach music to that level and that stage of learning. It is a toss-up in any other space. And I've seen a lot of great teachers in both spaces, but you have a little bit more of a guarantee that you're working with a professional who knows what to do with your young child, if you choose to go to a Suzuki program. So I can't give you a best, but I can give you some information about which instrument you might prefer. I will start off with a high recommendation for the piano for a few reasons. If you're concerned about the sounds and having an obnoxious instrument being played in the house, the piano is a great instrument to start with because there is not a lot of work towards tone production. They don't have to develop muscles in their mouth or their fingers in order to produce a good sound. The piano sounds the way it does. So that's one perk. The second perk is the fact that when reading standard music notation with the piano, your child has to learn both treble clef and bass clef and learn how to read them at the same time. That opens up so many pathways to have to read both horizontally and vertically at the same time. Learning to read in both clefs will make it easy to transfer to an instrument that is either treble clef, clef or bass clef afterward. Isolating and playing an instrument that only reads one clef can get the mind kind of fixed in that one clef and make you have to do a little bit more work in order to read a different clef. Not impossible, but if you start off naturally reading both, it's easier to transfer onto a different cleft instrument. A consideration is that if you can't have a full-size piano in your home, that you want to be sure to get a weighted keyboard. And again, these tend to be a little pricier than other instruments that you can play, but it's a great investment because it's not the kind of thing that needs to be replaced or that can be damaged easily. Other instruments to consider, if you want your child to play an instrument at a young age or they're expressing a lot of interest at a very young age, string instruments are a great option for young children because of the number of sizes they come in. For instance, with the Suzuki method, I believe that they start with children as young as 3 or 4 years old, and they have violins that are this big. And oftentimes, if you choose the Suzuki method, they're not learning to play right away. They spend almost the first portion of their curriculum, not first semester, just working on the bow and the correct way to hold the instrument. But again, they can get started if you choose that method at a young age because they move in half sizes or quarter sizes through the adult size instrument. So all string instruments can be started at a very young age if your child has the attention span and the interest. If you're starting to look at an instrument at around 3rd grade, then really the things to consider are what you can tolerate in terms of volume in your home and the size of your child. You likely, if your child is more petite, would not want to give them a tuba, although they may be interested. But really, those are the factors. A lot of professional musicians, if they're looking at recommending an instrument for a student or your band teacher, they may look at physical characteristics like their facial structure, shape of their lips, things like that. But really, I wouldn't let those be limitations. It just might be something that will make them more naturally able to produce a better sound than some of those instruments, but not something that you should put a lot of weight on. Really, it's about your child's interest and your tolerance for the volume of that instrument. Brass instruments, of course, being the loudest, and woodwind instruments, for the most part, being a little quieter, but then they also have those really high pitches, which my mom will tell you from my clarinet days can also be unbearable. When should I enroll my child in music lessons or classes? There are so many music classes out there for infants and toddlers, and there really is no right starting point for those classes. You can start at any point if you have the right mindset. Know that the purpose of those classes is music exploration and experience with the skills that I mentioned in my answer about how do I teach my child about music. So all of those underlying skills are what should be worked on in a great mommy and me or parent-child class. If you don't go in with the expectation that children are going to leave reading music or being proficient on some type of instrument, then you're going to be good at any age. Just enjoy the experience and the guidance from what I hope would be a music professional who can support the development of the skills I mentioned in previous questions. As far as private lessons go and getting children on a particular instrument, I would say 3rd grade is an ideal time to begin that process if you want children to be reading and reading standard notation as well as playing the instrument. Most programs that start much younger than that, like the Suzuki program, there's a lot of playing by rote that happens because of the fact that literacy kind of develops around the same age, music literacy and literacy of your primary language. And so reading music and playing an instrument at the same time is a challenging skill and will go a lot slower at a young age. The other thing to consider is attention span. With my own experience with a 1st grader in a private lesson, they did not have the attention span to accomplish much. In a 30-minute lesson, which is short, I would say there might have been 10 minutes of actual focus on the work. Beyond that, we were talking about cartoons, what happened at school, and anything else that was on that student's brain. By 3rd grade, the attention span is a little bit longer. They're starting to already have a really great skill set within their primary language literacy. And so that is very transferable to reading standard music notation, and it's usually a much smoother process. The other thing to consider is size. The smaller the child is, string instruments come in a wide variety of sizes, and therefore you can start children very young. The piano is also a very accessible instrument at a young age. However, other instruments pretty much come in one size, and so about third grade is the size that they can handle a full-size adult instrument. Depending on your child, it might be a little bit older.